His healthcare law made health insurance even more expensive. We've had stimulus and bailouts. Obama added almost $16,000 in debt for every American. How will my kids pay that off when they can't even find jobs? Now Obama wants more spending and taxes. That won't fix things. I had so many hopes. Cutting taxes and debt and creating jobs. That's the change we need. Tell President Obama to cut the job-killing debt and support the New Majority Agenda at newmajorityagenda.org.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
And welcome back into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee. Thanks for being here this evening. As we continue our walk down Fiscal Cliff Lane, because all roads lead to the Fiscal Cliff, I found this to be remarkable. Today, Secretary Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury Secretary Geithner, indicated that today was the right day to notify Congress that the fiscal cliff will be here on December 31st. That, well, rather than my words, let's go right to the words of the Secretary of the Treasury. In a letter dated today to the Honorable Harry Reid, Majority Leader, United States Senate, Mr. Geithner says, "Dear Mr. Leader, I'm writing to inform you that the statutory debt limit will be reached on December 31st, 2012, and to notify you that the Treasury Department will shortly begin taking certain extraordinary measures authorized by law to temporarily postpone the date that the United States would otherwise default on its legal obligations. These extraordinary measures, which are explained in detail in an appendix to this letter, can create approximately $200 billion in headroom under the debt limit. Under normal circumstances, that amount of headroom would last approximately 2 months. However, given the significant uncertainty that now exists with regard to unresolved tax and spending policies for 2013, that would be the fiscal cliff that we were talking about before, but I digress. It is not possible to predict the effective duration of these measures. At this time, the extent to which the upcoming tax filing season will be delayed as a result of these unresolved policy questions is also uncertain. If left unresolved, the expiring tax provisions and automatic spending cuts, as well as the attendant delays in filing of tax returns, would have the effect of adding some additional time to the duration of the extraordinary measures. Treasury will provide more guidance regarding the expected duration of these measures when the policy outlook becomes clearer." Copies sent to Speaker of the House Boehner, House Democrat Leader Pelosi, Senate Republican Leader McConnell, the Chairman of the House Ways and Means, David Camp, the Ranking Member of the House Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Levin, Max Baucus, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Finance, and Orrin Hatch, Ranking Member, Senate Committee on Finance, and all other members of the 112th Congress. So they all should know exactly what's coming down the pike. So who can say that they don't really know what's going on. So, with that said, we should have no doubt in our minds what's about to happen. So, on top of that, let's combine this notice from the fact that the Social Security program has announced that they ran a $47.8 billion deficit in fiscal 2012, as the program only brought in $725.429 billion in cash, but paid out $773.247 billion in benefits and overhead expenses, according to official data published by the Social Security Administration. The Social Security Administration also released new data revealing that the number of workers collecting disability benefits hit a record of 8,827,795 in December, up by nearly 25,000 people. The overall number of Social Security program beneficiaries, including retired workers, dependent family members and survivors, and disabled workers and their dependent family members, also hit a record in December, climbing from 56,658,000 to 56,758,000, almost an additional 1.8 or 100,000 or more. In 2011, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there was an average of 112.5 million full-time workers in the United States, of whom 17.8 million worked full-time for local, state, or federal government. That would equate to roughly just under 20%. That left an average of only 94.75 million full-time private sector workers in the country. Now you think about that for a second. Only 94.75 million full-time private sector workers are the ones paying the salaries and paying into Social Security. So that means that for every 1.67 Americans who worked full-time in the private sector in 2011, there's now one person collecting benefits from the Social Security Administration. So that ratio is 1 to 1.67. Despite its fiscal, and you've got to love Washington euphemisms, despite its fiscal 2012 quote-unquote net cash flow deficit, again, apologies for any technical difficulties and interruptions with the program. So how in the world were they able to do that? Well, that's because the Social Security Administration says it's because the U.S. Treasury paid the trust funds $112.4 billion in interest in fiscal 2012 on the historical surpluses in Social Security taxes that the Treasury siphoned off to cover other spending by the government. Now, if this sounds like a shell game, and you're imagining 3 walnuts with a nut underneath one of them, it's really about a dozen or so walnuts, and there's maybe only 1 or 2 nuts amongst them all. At the end of calendar year 2011, the Social Security Trust Fund equaled approximately $2.678 trillion. In fact, the last time the Social Security program ran a net cash flow in the positive, a surplus, was in fiscal 2009. And that would have begun in the last year of the Bush administration for those following along at home. In that year, Social Security's revenues exceeded its benefit and overhead payments by $19.358 billion. In fiscal 2010, Social Security ran a $36.8 billion deficit, and in 2011 ran a $47.975 billion deficit. Now, here's where it pays to follow closely. There are two Social Security trust funds, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund and the Disability Insurance Trust Fund. The OASI Trust Fund covers benefits to retired workers and their families and to deceased workers' families. The Disability Insurance Trust Fund covers benefits to disabled workers and their families. The trust funds, this is where government accounting creates all of its problems. The trust funds are required by law to hand over all surplus revenues to the Treasury, and the Treasury then provides special issue non-marketable bonds, the equivalent of an electronic IOU. Those trust funds are then given these electronic IOUs in return for the cash being the surplus revenues. Given that those revenues should have been earmarked for future benefits payments, there really is no surplus revenue. But only in America, in federal government accounting, are they able to pull something like this off. Those IOUs become part of the national debt. When the Treasury pays quote-unquote interest, that increases the value of Social Security trust funds, and it does so by simply increasing the number of IOUs it owes the trust funds. When the Social Security program runs a net cash flow deficit, as it has in the last 3 fiscal years, the Treasury needs to borrow cash from the public to keep the program funded, because, of course, it siphoned off all the previous surpluses and spent that money. And as we all know, as of December 21st, the federal government's debt was $16.336 trillion, and on December the 31st, Secretary Geithner tells us that we are going to reach the statutory debt limit that is, I believe, $16.34 trillion, give or take, and the result of which will mean that, well, we could conceivably default on our loans. Will they let that happen? Doubtful. Will they raise the debt ceiling again? Probably. Is that the right thing to do? I doubt it. But that said, the reality is the time has come for Americans to stop dawdling around, to stop listening to the nonsense that our leaders in Washington and even in our state capitals, listening to the bovine fecal matter that they're feeding us, and to start asking the real and the tough questions. How can you, with a straight face, look at us and say that Social Security is solvent when there isn't a dime in the trust fund? How can you look at us with a straight face and say that things are getting better when you look at all these statistics that clearly tell us that things are getting worse? How can you look at us with a straight face and tell us that the problem is revenue when the increase in spending since 2008 and the effort that is being made to make that increased spending the new baseline is mathematically unsustainable? We just need to continue to ask those questions. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. News Busted is next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.